when Kate was 9, LQC Lamar was appointed by President Cleveland to serve as his Secretary of the Interior, and he asked Edward Clark to be his assistant. The letter Lamar wrote to Clark is a very interesting historical document which I found in the archives at Ole Miss, and I wanted to read an excerpt from it for you now. My dear Clark, Cleveland has tendered me the place of Secretary of the Interior, and I have accepted. If I could have you by me to counsel and sustain me, I would feel vivified, reassured, and perfectly confident. Without you, I'm for the present at sea. I want you to take the place of First Assistant Secretary of the Interior. A residence here is very pleasant. Mrs. Clark would enjoy it, and Kate would have advantages here in education not inferior to any in the country. Yours truly, LQC Lamar. And then he added this postscript. Washington is beautiful and healthy in the winter and close to summer resorts. The law is a good business here. Clark agreed and went ahead of his family to Washington to be sworn in. But during his trip, Carrie Clark received 2 telegrams from Lamar, which are also in the archives at Ole Miss, because when her husband arrived in D.C., he was immediately taken ill. And these telegrams are in the book, but I wanted to read them to you. In the first, Lamar wrote, Mr. Clark passed good night, says he is much better this morning. Mrs. Clark not come until further notice. LQC Lamar. The second shared the exciting news that Clark had been confirmed. Mr. Clark confirmed by the Senate Assistant Secretary Interior. Better this morning. LQC Lamar. However, despite Lamar's telegrams suggesting otherwise, Clark unexpectedly and tragically died the next day. He had pneumonia. So Kate Freeman Clark lost her father at the age of 9, and it is my opinion that her mother, although extremely distressed by the sudden death of her husband, was equally disappointed to not be moving to Washington, D.C. She and Kate never lived in Vicksburg again. They spent most of their time in either Memphis or Holly Springs during the next 5 years. Then in 1893, Carrie decided to finally leave Holly Springs for the East Coast. She and Kate moved to New York City to finish Kate's education and further her study of art. Kate attended Dr. Gardner's School for Young Ladies for 1 year, taking classes typical of a finishing school, such as spelling, rhetoric, literature, political economy, and languages. And I actually saw her report card, and she wasn't the strongest of students. However, after she graduated from Gardner's is when her real education began. Kate enrolled at the Art Students League of New York, where for the first time she joined a community of artists similar to herself, like-minded men and women with whom she could paint and have fun. And that's a picture of her at the Art Students League, and she is the third one in. I'm going to turn for a moment. Right up there, if you can spot her. I don't have a pointer, but she's the third one in from this side, standing there in the back. And I wanted to read to you an excerpt from the book about what it was like to be at the Art Students League. The League was an incredibly exciting place to study for a budding artist. Many of the original faculty members have become prominent names in the history of American art. William Merritt Chase, Thomas Eakins, John Henry Twatman, Kenyon Cock, Child Hassam, and Irving Wiles. According to Art Students League archivist Stephanie Cassidy, Kate Freeman Clark's enrollment records for 1894 to 1895 indicate that she studied AP, which could be an abbreviation for Antique Preparatory, followed that same session by MP, or Morning Painting, and CS, or Sketch Class. Clark's very first class, AP, with the American Impressionist painter J.H. Twatman, was a class for beginning students in order to learn the essential rudimentary elements such as perspective, proportion, highlighting, and shading before progressing to painting, and was a requirement before moving on to more advanced classes. After several months of study at the League, Kate declared in her journal on March 8th, 1895, quote, "I am now a League girl. Entered the preparatory and have just been promoted to heads. Enjoy it intensely." She was finally immersed in League life and described a typical day in a letter to her Uncle Russell. "Go to League at 9. That is when I can. Leave there at 12 and go to the conservatory and practice 2 hours if I can have the piano. Come home, have lunch. At 1:15 I start to the sketch class, get home about 6:15. So you see, I do not always have much time." She then followed League instructor Irving Wiles to his summer art school on Long Island, which was a convenient way of leaving the city during the heat of the summer. And it was during this first summer attending Mr. Wiles's art school that Kate was introduced to the plein air technique, which means painting in the open air with the artist's subject in full view. Clark attended Wiles's summer art school for 1 summer, and it was during this summer that Wiles took his students to visit the Shinnecock Summer School of Art, the school of his mentor, the greatest American impressionist and practitioner of plein air painting of the day, William Merritt Chase. And Kate Freeman Clark was changed forever. So at this point, I'm going to show you a few pictures of Shinnecock. Oh, and this is Mama Kate, was what she was known by, and Irving Wiles, you can see behind me. This is William Merritt Chase at Shinnecock, surrounded by a number of female art students. This is Kate Freeman Clark painting plein air at her easel, standing, and the model out, you can see the model which she's painting. And this is Kate Freeman Clark at Shinnecock, and the house in the background is William Merritt Chase's. And that's Kate looking for a scene, actually holding up a device that helps her frame the scene that she wants to paint. And that's William Merritt Chase looking dapper, and that becomes important later on. He's actually wearing an all-white suit, which she remarks in her journal. She actually witnessed him paint in oils wearing white and not getting a drop on him. And after that, she decided she would paint in oils too. And this is an image of Rockwell Kent, who was a fellow artist who you might have heard of and is an important part of the next part of my story. So Wiles took his students to a Chase critique session, which were open to the public once a week. Apparently it was quite a spectacle, and residents of Long Island, in addition to the art students, came out for the weekly event. I found versions of these critique sessions in several autobiographies of Chase art students, but one particularly descriptive one was written by Rockwell Kent, who attended at the same time as Clark. So I want to read it to you now. The studio, he's going to place you right in the critique session. The studio where these criticisms were held was of ample size to accommodate the 50 to 100 people who, as students or as visitors, attended. The pictures were displayed on a 3-tiered reversible screen, its rear being loaded while the pictures on the front were under criticism. When all was ready, the audience in its place, the pictures mounted to be shown, the master would appear. Chase was a little man, dapper in dress to the point of foppishness, spatted, bat-winged collared, his cravat drawn through a priceless jeweled ring. He invariably wore a carnation in his buttonhole. Gray-haired, gray-bearded, and mustachioed, he was a handsome and distinguished-looking man. Black ribbon pince-nez completed, shall we say, his makeup? No, it was all natural to him, completed William Merritt Chase. And then he continues, as the screen was turned around to bring another lot of pictures into view, the master found himself confronted by an array of dismal daubs, whose subject matter, if they had any, was lost in the murk of black paint, with which the canvases appeared to have been smeared. For a long time he contemplated the works, turning at last to ask who had done them. I did, Mr. Chase, came the cheerful response from a female newcomer in the audience. Again he looked at the pictures long and earnestly, only to turn with the admission that he didn't understand them. Oh, but I felt that way, Mr. Chase, said their creator. Chase took off his pince-nez and looked at the lady. Madame, he said, speaking ever so earnestly, the next time you feel that way, don't paint. So for the next 6 years, Kate Freeman Clark would continue her study at the Art Students League in the fall and spring, and then attend Chase's Shinnecock School in the summers, painting primarily in plein air, but also still life and portrait painting as well. Her years at Shinnecock were so transformative in her life and career that she herself wrote an essay about it 20 years later. And I have published that essay in its entirety in the book. It's a wonderful first-hand look at a typical Chase critique session like Kent's, but what is most interesting about it is that she writes it from her point of view when one of her paintings was critiqued alongside Kent's, and she was awarded the prize for Best Painting of the Week. It clearly was an important day in her life and career, and the prize was Chase keeping her painting and Clark having her portrait done by the master himself. And that's it. But you have to buy the book to read the essay. It's the entire chapter 5. So, but isn't that a beautiful painting? And the Chase signature is on the left-hand side. And that painting has been in Holly Springs all this time. They have a number of Chases, by the way. So in 1902, Chase closed his Shinnecock School, and Clark stopped taking lessons at the Art Students League. She did not stop painting, however. It appears that Carrie, Kate, and Mama Kate would still travel in the summers to escape the oppressive heat of the city, often going to the Hudson River Valley, where several of Clark's landscapes were painting. And it was during 1904 to 1917 that an exciting chapter of Clark's life began, exhibiting her work. She was very timid about venturing into the exhibition realm because her mother, who chaperoned her everywhere and was a huge influence in her life, did not approve of ladies exhibiting or selling their artwork. It was not, in her opinion, a feminine endeavor. But Clark boldly attempted it anyway, despite her mother's objections, sending her work out under the gender-neutral alias Freeman Clark. And it was during this period, the first decade of the 20th century, that Carrie and Kate befriended another single mother and her artist son, Sarah and Frank Wadsworth, who also had attended Chase's summer school and, like Kate and Carrie, were close to Chase. And there's Mama Kate. She's in all the pictures with Frank Wadsworth. And letters that I found in the Clark archive from the Wadsworths were some of the most interesting. And it was Frank and his mother who cheered Kate on from the sidelines when she first started to exhibit her work. And I want to read you a couple of these letters. And as you can tell, I'm a fan of letters. We're losing the art of letter writing, aren't we, in a very big way. So when we go back in time and read these beautiful letters, I think it's important. So, hold on. Frank Wadsworth was thrilled with the success of Clark's first exhibition attempt. In a letter he wrote, "You certainly are a genius to be able to exhibit at the National Academy. I can't." And when that success was quickly followed by paintings accepted into shows at the Boston Art Club and then the Pennsylvania Academy, he expressed his exquisite delight in her success. "I am delighted to hear of your two at the Penn. That must be a fine exhibit. Everyone here in Chicago seems to think the Pittsburgh is the greatest thing going, but I don't believe it can equal the Penn." And Frank's mother, Sarah, also expressed her joy over Kate's work being accepted to the Pennsylvania Academy in a letter dated February 14th, 1905. In the same letter, she inquires as to whether Clark is the Freeman Clark listed in the catalog and shared some news about Chase. "Are you the Freeman Clark mentioned in the Penn catalog? We were sure of it when we saw the subject of the painting, and we hear it was also in the Academy exhibition. Isn't that fine?" She's so happy. "We were so glad and congratulate you heartily. Have also just heard that Mr. Chase has sold his last summer's fish picture to the Corcoran Gallery for $2,000. That's an incredible, that's how much a valuable painting went for. "Hurrah! Are you going to Spain? We are thinking of it very seriously and wish you would decide to go. You must see the gallery in Madrid." And of course, she's referencing the Prado, a little gallery. Sadly, this friendship would only last a short time. Wadsworth would die suddenly while studying art in Madrid. He gets an infection. It is my belief that his death, followed in due time by Chase, Mama Kate, and then her mother, would simply be too much for Clark to bear. But before I get to that, let me talk about Clark's short but impressive exhibition record. Kate, as Freeman Clark, showed paintings in many prestigious galleries and shows all over the country. The Corcoran in Washington several times, the Buffalo Fine Arts Gallery, the Browse Gallery in New York City, and the most significant of her career, being chosen as one of only 60 paintings from the 900 submitted to be selected for the Panama Pacific Exposition in San Francisco in 1915. And the centennial of this event was just celebrated 2 years ago. In this exhibit, her painting, The Climbers, was exhibited alongside the greatest painters of the day, Mary Cassatt, John Singer Sargent, Winslow Homer, James McNeill Whistler, and many others. I'm going to stop at this point and show you several of her paintings. All of these images can be found in the book. So if you can't see them right now very well, the book has beautiful photographs of all of them. This is, let me tell you a little bit about her paintings. Most of them are untitled and undated. So I wish I could show you the climbers, but I can't. And I tried to track it down, even emailing people in San Francisco who are putting together the centennial. It's listed in the program, the original catalog, but there's no image of it. And there's no painting that I have found in the gallery in Holly Springs called The Climbers. A lot of her paintings change names over time and have been renamed. So I'll do the best with what we've got here. This first painting we do know was painted at Shinnecock.
Pardon, but
yeah.
Can we alter the lights a little bit?
Oh, yeah. Can we make it a little darker?
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. This one also is at Shinnecock, and it's called Muddy Roads. This one was one I discovered in the Holly Springs gallery storage in the back, and told them to pull it out because it is William Merritt Chase's house. So it puts her right there at Shinnecock, and I had gotten a photograph from the Smithsonian of the house, and I've put them side by side in the book so you can see the similarity. This is one of her favorites called Moore's Mill Pond, and she was very good at doing reflection in water. There's another example of reflection. She also did a lot of domestic scenes like Mary Cassatt, women engaged in work. And here's a gorgeous one of a woman sewing. And this one of just this lovely lady sitting outside. And some of these paintings were actually in banks in Holly Springs when I first started my research. This was one that was right behind a teller that I asked for her to move over so I could photograph it. They didn't even know what was hanging, and I'll get to that later. This one's called The Gardens. It's very beautiful and actually is owned by a private collector who restored it quite beautifully. Another pretty lady scene with the same parasol that was, I think, in the gardens. She did flowers very well, too, which William Merritt Chase himself said are very difficult to do. So make a note as I take you through these pictures, you'll see her abundance of flowers in both these outdoor scenes, but in still life. This one's called White Blossoms, and it's hard to see here, but if you look low, you'll see the two children down below and the house in the background. And in the book, I had the photographer, Will Jacks from Cleveland, Mississippi. He's a fabulous photographer, and so he took a lot of these detail shots, so you could see it better in the book. She also did chickens. This is actually an unframed sketch. I mean, there are over 1,200 paintings in Holly Springs, but a number are just sketches and unframed. I love this one. I do not know the child, although it's been titled Agnes in Her Purple Plaid Dress. She did not do children very often. She never married. She did not have children. So this is a pretty special portrait, I think. Here's one of her still lives, and they're very beautiful. And another. This is one of her big landscapes. It's called March Meadows. It doesn't look as big, but it's a very large painting that I think was done during her years going to the Hudson River Valley in the summers after Shinnecock. And that's what the next series is some of the Hudson River Valley landscapes. This one is called Day Nursery and is historically significant because after she died in the early 80s, a few of her paintings were accepted into the Art in Embassy program, which is quite an honor for an artist. And this was one that the tag is still on the back, indicating that it had gone to the embassy in Belgium. This is called A Garden with Rock Wall. Just another beautiful landscape. She painted all different seasons, as this indicates. Very few winter scenes. This is why this is interesting to me. And if you look in the lower corner, you'll see her signature, Freeman Clark, right there. Everybody see it? And I think that's, yeah, I'm going to stop there. So what's interesting about this period of her life is that even though she was exhibiting a bit, she was not painting as much. The art world was changing. The Armory Show of 1913, which is this, ushered in a new modernist style of art, one which Chase and his followers did not embrace. So these are images from the Armory Show, and I love the cartoon on the bottom because they're trying to figure out what that painting is. They're kind of like, what is it? In fact, Chase dies 3 years after the Armory Show, and the sale of his works, his beautiful plein air landscapes, as well as his portraits and still lifes, were sold for next to nothing. Clark remained loyal to Chase in terms of her style, and I've only found a few examples in the collection that, although quite good, can be considered modernist. And here's one of them. This one's called Elevated Train, and I imagine her painting it from her boarding house window, which is where she lived in New York, in rooms at a boarding house. And so it's got a nice, more abstract quality to it. And then the next two are small watercolors that I think are beautiful and very different for her. This one's called City Lights, and then this one's called Bright Lights in the City. And they're very small watercolors. They look bigger in my book. All right. But in her journals, she writes about the death of Chase and what she calls the sad sale of his paintings and studio artifacts. And I want to read that to you because I think what's so important about Kate Freeman Clark is not just the art, but that she puts you on the front lines of art history. She was there, she knew people, and so this is about the sale of Chase's things. And the reason his life went up for sale after his death in 1916 was that he was married and had 9 children. And his wife was smart enough to realize, this is of course the years of World War I, that she needed to make some money, and she felt like she needed to move quickly. Sadly, it doesn't seem like she sold it at a good time at all. So Kate writes, "The sale of the studio furnishings was as poor and heartbreaking as that of the pictures and still life objects. The pictures brought a little more than the first night, but oh, so little. Mr. Rittenberg," that's a fellow artist from Shinnecock, "he bought the one of Mr. Chase painting himself sitting on a high stool on the rounds, but on the rounds it is called Twilight in the Studio for $150. Unbelievable. My recollection is that it was of the reflection on a picture glass, not a mirror, which caused the low tone, not twilight. I love that. She's correcting what is out there about the painting. I was wild to go that night just to bid on that painting, if on nothing else. Shouldn't wonder if he, Mr. Rittenberg, bought the other things I wanted, as our tastes seemed the same. The total of all sales was $60,151.50. That figure is in her journal, and I confirmed it in a biography of Chase. It should have been 200,000 or 300,000, I think, in normal times, or more, as most things went below 100. It seemed like a party of harpies preying on his body and picking the bones. I am sorry I did not get a souvenir of some kind. Another reason Kate abandoned painting at this time was that Mama Kate was living with Carrie and Kate in their boarding house in the city, and her health was not good. It was also World War I, and art was not much on Kate's mind. Her journals during this period provide a first-hand look at life in the city during the war and the onerous conditions under which the 3 generations of women lived. Here's Mama Kate. I love that portrait. And let me just read you one last passage about life in the city. Mama Kate, much affected by the heat. A day or so more would have finished her, I think. She was so weak, she wanted to lie down all the time and did for 2 days. Kept her cooler with cold water or ice in a hot water bag. Life is most uncomfortable. Would give anything in the world if we were at home or even if we had an apartment. Mama Kate seems to sense the disturbed state of our minds, and though we say nothing to her of moving, seems to think we have, and gets confused from one room to the other and thinks she is in a strange place. If she is to have the discomfort of thinking she has moved, she might as well have the actual comforts it might bring. It breaks my heart to have her last days spent this way. So Kate finally does return to Holly Springs, but it's not until both Mama Kate and Carrie die, which occurred 3 years apart. Mama Kate in 1919, right after the conclusion of the war, and her mother in 1922 from her own health problems. Kate finally returns to the family home place after making much-needed repairs and even adds an upstairs studio, suggesting she intended to paint. Now, this is what the house looks like right now, not when she moved in. There are photos from the years in my book of the time when she actually moved back. Yet she never does, meaning she never paints again. Nor does she bring her paintings back to Holly Springs with her. She leaves them in a warehouse in New York City where they had been in storage since before her mother's death, as there was no room for them at the boarding house where they lived. Clark lived a traditional Southern lady's life in Holly Springs, becoming involved in the community through her church as well as other activities. And my theory as to why she never paints again is because she no longer had the support system that she needed. Her teacher, her mother, her grandmother, and her friend Frank Wadsworth all gone. I also think she was physically exhausted and depressed, and her eyes were beginning to give her trouble. And this all is, I back all this up with letters that I've read in the journals. And I say she never painted again, but we do have 2 paintings that we can identify as Mississippi scenes, but we don't know when they were painted, as Clark did not date any of her work. So the one over here is Work Out in Mississippi Grove, and the other one is known as the Shuford House, which was the house directly behind Kate Freeman Clark's family home. And she was friends with the Shufords, but we do not know the dates. In fact, it would be her vision that would make her a recluse at the end of her life. By the end of the 1930s, she withdrew and spent most of the time inside. That's the Kate Freeman Clark that citizens today who I talk to remember, a crazy cat lady. But this version of Kate Freeman Clark is not the Kate Freeman Clark that I want us to remember. Clark died in 1957 at the age of 81, and one of the first documents I read in my research was her will, an extraordinary document that woke the citizens of Holly Springs up to the incredible artist that she was. They had no idea until the reading of her will that she was a painter who had over 1,000 paintings in storage in New York City. Her will expressed her desire that a permanent gallery be built to house them, and she left $60,000 to the city to build it. She also hoped that her home, Freeman Place, and its contents could, quote, fill some useful social or artistic function, such as a museum, library, art gallery, or civic guest house or women's club, and that her extensive clothing collection, quote, costumes and apparel of sufficient interest and preservation to illustrate fashion and manners could show the amazing changes between 1914 to 1933, minds and modes and manners. She was clearly concerned about her legacy, since she left no direct heirs. Her wishes were carried out by the city of Holly Springs, and a small gallery was built for the paintings. And this is an interior shot of the gallery. However, before the gallery was built, Holly Springs had to find places to hang all of these paintings. Literally, a van pulled up in front of the Bank of Holly Springs, and the bank was not large enough for all of them. So the majority were stored at the bank, but others found homes at the water department, the Episcopal Church, and several of the historic homes in Holly Springs. Even after the gallery officially opened, several of her works remained in these locations, and I went around Holly Springs and located them. And I'm happy to report they have since been returned to the gallery. I think I gave them the reason because we wanted to photograph them, and I don't think they felt they could ask for them back after all this time. But now they have them and they're not giving them up. So I would like to conclude. Let's have another. Yeah, this is the Marshall County Historical Museum, which is on the same street as the Kate Freeman Clark Gallery and her home, and is where, when I say the Clark Archive, where I did all my research, meaning the letters, the journals, the dresses. The art is in the gallery, but her life is in the museum. So I'd like to conclude with a quote from Clark from notes I found for a talk she gave in 1925 to the Thursday Club, a women's study club in Holly Springs that she was a member of and which still exists today. It's the oldest women's club in Mississippi. She talked about art, of course, and it's where I found the title of my book. An artist was painting a brook which flowed by the wayside. The day was brilliantly clear, and the deep blue of the zenith was even a deeper and more royal blue when reflected from the glistening surface of the little pool beneath the bridge. The blue was thrown into startling relief by the juxtaposition of the dark reflection of the deep green trees on the bank. A country man who habitually passed that way 6 times a day was amazed into questioning the color on the canvas. "Why do you paint the water blue?" he asked. The artist replied, "Come down and look." The man descended the bank and, looking, exclaimed in a dazed way, "Why, it is blue." He had never noticed that the color of the water changed with the color of the sky above it. Nearly everyone reacts to color. Can you doubt that there was more in that man's daily walk for him after seeing the artist's sketch? So in conclusion, I'm excited to share with you the news that close to you now in Oxford, at the Art Museum on the campus of Ole Miss, is the largest exhibit of Clark's work to date. The exhibit was designed to tie in with the publication of my book. And if you can't get to Oxford by July 22nd, you can come to Jackson in August, as some of her paintings will be on exhibit at the Mississippi Museum of Art. That show opens August 17th. And the latest news is that from there, her paintings will travel to Little Rock. So it truly is the year of Kate Freeman Clark, and I'm excited to have the privilege of sharing her story with you. Thank you. And I'm happy to take questions if we have time.
How did you choose art?
Well, as you might know, my first two books were on Mississippi women writers, and I was fortunate enough to be asked by my publisher, University Press of Mississippi, who I wanted to write about next. And there wasn't a woman writer that I really wanted to do, that I felt inspired to do. So I started thinking about art, because I took a lot of art history in college at Duke. Never majored in it, but loved it. And so I started looking at art. And I looked specifically at Patty Carr Black's book, Art in Mississippi, which is the really most important book about art in this state. And literally flipping pages, I came across that painting she has in the book, Workout in Mississippi Grove, that painting I showed you. And it was gorgeous, and it just stopped me cold. And there was just a little bit like an encyclopedia entry about Clark in that book. And it talked mainly about life after she died, the story about her will and leaving the money. And of course, to me, that's a movie waiting to happen. I mean, don't you agree? And so what I do is I start looking to see if anyone's done a book. And the only thing that's been written about Clark was a dissertation at Delta State, was a few articles and books, and one catalog from a show of her art in 1980. So, and that was very dated, and the art was mostly in black and white. So the press liked the idea of revisiting the painter, doing it all in color. I was fortunate that I came after that Marie Hull book, which maybe some of you've seen, Bright Fields. Gorgeous big coffee table book that I didn't want a coffee table book. I wanted a more readable book like my other two that you could hold in your lap. But I think they saw women artists were kind of hot right now, so it all fell into place. Yeah, any other questions? Anybody? All right, well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.